In today's video, you'll hear the story of a man whose home security cameras, meant to protect his sanctuary, suddenly began showing impossible feeds of his own apartment from an unseen perspective, plunging him into a spiral of paranoia and the chilling realization that he might not be alone. The faint, reassuring glow of the server lights cast long, digital shadows across Ethan's living room, a silent testament to his meticulous efforts. Every corner of his apartment, a sanctuary of organized minimalist design, was covered by a network of high-definition cameras, their tiny lenses watchful sentinels against the chaos of the city outside. Ethan, a man who found solace in order and control, spent his evenings immersed in the quiet hum of his surveillance monitors, a ritual of peace of mind. The screens displayed a mosaic of familiar angles: the pristine kitchen, the shadowed hallway, the inviting warmth of the living area, each feed crisp and clear. He sipped his cooling tea, the gentle click of his mouse the only sound, scrolling through archived footage, a habit born of a desire to eliminate every unforeseen variable. His apartment, high above the ceaseless thrum of urban life, felt secure, a meticulously constructed fortress against the unknown. He trusted in data, in cold, hard facts, in the unblinking eye of his technology. The air was cool, conditioned, smelling faintly of clean linen and new electronics, a comforting scent that reinforced the feeling of a controlled environment. One Tuesday evening, amidst the routine scan, a new feed flickered onto the main monitor, displacing one of his regular views. It was labeled, incongruously, Apartment 4B, Living Room. Ethan frowned, a ripple of confusion disturbing the placid surface of his calm. He had no camera in Apartment 4B. He didn't even know anyone in 4B. The building's network was rigorously segmented, each resident's cameras linked only to their private hub. He clicked on the feed, assuming a system glitch, a routing error. The image that filled the screen sent a cold, sharp jolt through him. It was unmistakably his own living room. His couch, his coffee table, the precisely aligned spines of his books on the shelf. But the angle was wrong, profoundly, disturbingly wrong. It was a perspective he could never achieve from any of his installed cameras. It was as if the lens hovered mid-air, a silent, unblinking eye in the corner of his own ceiling, looking down. The lighting in the feed was subtly different, a sickly yellow hue, and the colors seemed muted, as if drained of life. A profound unease, cold and alien, began to seep into his carefully constructed sense of security. The hum of his server rack, usually a soothing drone, now seemed to pulse with a low, menacing thrum, an auditory echo of his growing dread. He meticulously checked his system logs, his fingers flying across the keyboard with trained precision. No external connections, no unauthorized access points, no rogue devices. Every protocol was secure, every firewall unbreached. Yet the feed persisted, a ghostly window into his own home from an impossible vantage point. The timestamp on the Apartment 4B feed mirrored his own, accurate to the second. He glanced around his actual living room, his gaze darting from the real couch to the spectral one on the screen, a chilling mirror image. The air around him suddenly felt heavy, thick with an unseen presence, a palpable tension that pressed against his eardrums. He could almost feel an unseen gaze on his neck, a cold, persistent stare that violated the sanctity of his personal space. His methodical mind, accustomed to logical solutions, strained against the encroaching absurdity of the situation. This was beyond a glitch. This was an intrusion of a profound and terrifying nature. The scent of ozone, sharp and metallic, began to mingle with the clean air of his apartment. a phantom odor of active electronics, of something that was both there and not there. He dismissed it as his imagination, a byproduct of stress, but the scent clung, insistent and unsettling. Chloe arrived home, her cheerful greeting dissolving into a questioning frown as she saw Ethan's rigid posture, his eyes fixed on the array of monitors. He gestured to the impossible feed, explaining the anomaly in clipped, rapid sentences, his voice strained. She peered at the screen, then at their living room, her brow furrowing in confusion. Her initial reaction was practical disbelief, a logical dismissal. "It's a bug, Ethan. A cross-wired signal from the building's old system, maybe," she suggested, her voice calm, a stark contrast to his internal turmoil. She even made a few calls to the building management, relaying Ethan's technical jargon with a skeptical tone. The building manager, Mr. Garcia, curtly dismissed it as a known residual interference from old wiring, promising to look into it next week. His dismissal, however, only served to deepen Ethan's unease. He knew his system. He knew its robustness. This was no simple interference. It was deliberate, impossible, and utterly terrifying. The more Chloe tried to rationalize, the more the cold, creeping dread solidified within Ethan. The phantom image on the screen seemed to gain definition, its colors subtly deepening, its edges sharper, as if it were slowly materializing into a solid reality. Hours later, long after Chloe had gone to bed, dismissing his fears as technological paranoia, Ethan remained glued to the monitor. The apartment 4B feed had stabilized, its sickly yellow hue deepening, giving the illusion of perpetual twilight. He noticed minute details now, things he'd missed in his initial panic, a faint, almost invisible smudge on the phantom camera lens, as if something had brushed against it. A subtle distortion in the corner of the frame, a slight blurring that suggested movement, something passing just outside the impossible view. He leaned closer, his eyes aching, straining to discern meaning in the digital static. The silence in his apartment was profound, broken only by the rhythmic hum of his machines, a counterpoint to the racing beat of his own heart. He felt a growing sense of isolation, a profound loneliness as he faced this incomprehensible threat, alone. Chloe's pragmatic dismissals, while well-intentioned, only emphasized the chasm between his terrifying reality and her comforting normalcy. He was adrift in a sea of his own making, a prisoner of the unblinking eye. Then it happened. A subtle shift within the apartment 4B feed. A shadow, deeper than the pervasive gloom, detached itself from the wall in the corner of the phantom living room. It was elongated, impossibly thin, moving with a jerky, almost imperceptible motion. It wasn't a human shadow. It had no discernible source of light, no clear form. It was simply a darker void within the darkness, a hungry consumption of light. It paused, hovering in the corner of the impossibly captured image, and then, slowly, deliberately, it extended a limb. Not an arm or a leg, but a tendril of pure shadow, stretching out, reaching towards the impossible camera lens. The air in Ethan's actual apartment grew ice cold, a sudden profound drop in temperature that made his skin prickle. A faint, cloying smell, like stagnant water, and old, wet concrete, wafted from his monitors. An impossible odor that seemed to emanate directly from the spectral feed. His stomach lurched, a wave of nausea washing over him. The shadow on the screen was now fully extended, its tip brushing against the phantom lens. And as it did, the feed flickered violently, a rapid succession of static and distorted images. The flickering feed resolved momentarily into a horrifyingly clear image. It was his bedroom. His bed, unmade from when he had risen that morning, was perfectly visible, captured from an angle directly above it, and then as quickly as it appeared, the image distorted, replaced by the original impossible living room feed. But something had changed. The smudge on the phantom lens was gone, replaced by a glistening, almost oily residue, like condensation or a viscous film. The air in his apartment was now heavy with the smell of wet earth, and something else, something metallic and sharp, like the tang of old blood. He stumbled back from the monitors, knocking his chair over with a clatter that echoed too loudly in the sudden silence. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum against the suffocating presence that now seemed to fill his home. He wasn't just being watched, he was being explored, his deepest privacy violated, every corner of his life exposed to an unseen, malevolent gaze. The thought of Chloe, asleep in their bedroom, suddenly sent a fresh wave of paralyzing terror through him. The realization that the entity could now see into their most private space, that it had potentially already been there, was unbearable. He felt a profound sense of defilement, a terrifying intimacy forced upon him by this unseen intruder. He scrambled to disconnect the Apartment 4B feed, his fingers fumbling desperately with the wires, pulling at cables, trying to sever the horrifying connection. But the screen remained, locked on the impossible image. He powered down his entire system, pulling the main plug from the wall, plunging his living room into a sudden, absolute darkness. Only the faint, ambient glow from the city outside provided any light, casting his furniture into ghostly, indistinct shapes. The silence was oppressive, no longer broken by the hum of his machines, but by the frantic thudding of his own heart. Yet, in the terrifying quiet, he still felt it. The profound coldness, the metallic scent, and the unwavering sensation of an unseen gaze. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that simply cutting the power wouldn't sever this connection. The entity was not on his network. It was within the network, a parasitic presence that had woven itself into the fabric of his reality. He stumbled towards the living room window, pulling back the curtain, his gaze darting across to the apartment building opposite, to where he knew Apartment 4B was located. It was dark, a silent, unassuming window among hundreds. But now, it seemed to pulse with a faint, almost invisible malevolence, a portal to an unseen horror. His mind raced, desperate for a rational explanation. He thought of Mr. Evans, the reclusive old man who lived on their floor, often seen muttering to himself in the hallway, or the building manager, Mr. Garcia, with his dismissive attitude, perhaps hiding something. He grasped at straws, anything to explain away the impossible, but the chilling truth clung to him. This was not human. This was something that defied logic, something that used his own technology against him, turning his sanctuary into a hunting ground. The air in his apartment continued to grow colder, a profound, unnatural chill that seemed to emanate from the very walls. He felt a creeping dread, the realization that his safe haven had become a cage, and the bars were made of unseen eyes. His every move was watched, every breath noted. He was exposed, vulnerable, and utterly alone in his terrifying discovery. The faint hum, previously from his servers, now seemed to emanate from the very walls, a low, resonant thrum that spoke of a deep, pervasive presence. He was trapped in his own home, a prisoner in a nightmare of his own making, and the unblinking eye of the camera, real or imagined, was always on him. And then, from the profound darkness of his powered-down living room, a faint, almost imperceptible click echoed, distinct and undeniable, as if a camera shutter had just closed right behind him. The faint, almost imperceptible click, sharp and undeniably close, pierced the suffocating darkness of Ethan's apartment. It was not merely an echo of his own frantic thoughts. It was a response, a chilling confirmation that the impossible surveillance had breached the digital realm and now inhabited his physical space. His breath hitched, a strangled gasp caught in his throat as a wave of paralyzing terror washed over him. He stood frozen, muscles rigid, every nerve ending screaming at him to turn, to confront the source of the sound. Yet an ancient, primal fear rooted him to the spot. The air behind him grew heavy, thick with an unseen pressure, a palpable presence that emanated an unnatural cold, far colder than the ambient temperature. He could feel it, a burning gaze on the back of his neck, a silent, predatory observation that violated the very core of his being. The scent of stagnant water and old wet concrete intensified, clinging to the air, making his stomach churn with nausea. It was the smell of something ancient, something that had crawled from a forgotten space into his meticulously clean home. Seconds stretched into an eternity. He strained his ears, listening for any further sound, any breath, any whisper that would confirm the entity's physical proximity. Only the frantic thudding of his own heart, a desperate drum against the encroaching silence, filled the void. He envisioned the phantom camera lens from the impossible feed, now directly behind him, unblinking, judging, capturing his raw fear. The thought was unbearable, a violation so profound it made his skin crawl. He slowly, agonizingly slowly began to turn, his head swiveling first, then his shoulders, then his entire body, a painful rotation into the unknown. The darkness of his living room, previously a comforting shroud, now felt like a suffocating blanket, concealing unseen horrors. He expected to see something monstrous, a distorted figure, but his eyes, straining in the gloom, found nothing. Only the familiar outlines of his furniture, muted by the absence of light, their forms subtly warped by his terror. The silence returned, deeper, heavier, more terrifying than before, as if whatever had clicked had now retreated into the very fabric of the shadows, becoming one with the oppressive emptiness. The immediate relief was fleeting, quickly replaced by a profound sense of defilement. The entity wasn't just observing, it was playing with him. A cat toying with a mouse, its presence a constant unseen threat. He fumbled for his phone, its screen a jarring beacon in the darkness, and quickly opened his building's schematic app. He zoomed in on apartment 4B, searching for any anomaly, any hidden access point, anything that could explain the impossible feed. The apartment was listed as empty, unoccupied for months after the last tenant's sudden departure. A nervous old woman who had moved out without a trace. Her departure had been swift, almost secretive, dismissed by Mr. Garcia as a personal matter. Now Ethan's mind raced, connecting the dots, each revelation tightening the knot of dread in his gut. Could she have known? Could she have seen what he was seeing now? The apartment 4B layout was unremarkable. A standard one-bedroom unit. No hidden rooms, no secret passages. Yet the impossible camera angle, the pervasive cold, the phantom smell, they all screamed of something deeply, fundamentally wrong with that space. The air in his own apartment pulsed with a low, resonant hum, a sound that seemed to emanate directly from the walls, vibrating up through the floorboards, an eerie mimicry of his powered-down server. He began a systematic search of his own apartment, a frantic, desperate act of reclaiming control. He ran his hands along the walls, beneath the furniture, behind every painting, searching for any hidden lens, any pinhole camera, any physical manifestation of the unblinking eye. His fingers brushed against cold, smooth surfaces, against the familiar textures of his belongings, but found nothing. The cold spot persisted, hovering near the corner of his living room, a profound chill that defied the regulated temperature of his apartment building. It was a localized anomaly, a pocket of unnatural cold that seemed to draw the warmth from his skin, making him shiver uncontrollably. The metallic tang of old blood, mixed with the sickly sweetness of formaldehyde, grew stronger, clinging to his clothes, his hair, his very breath. It was the scent of something ancient and terrible, something that had died here, or perhaps refused to die. He imagined the phantom shadow, its elongated tendril reaching out, touching the impossible camera lens, its form coalescing from the very air, solidifying into a grotesque reality. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through him, his stomach churning with revulsion. He stumbled into his bedroom, turning on the light, a desperate attempt to banish the encroaching darkness and the terrors it held. The sudden flood of illumination was jarring, momentarily blinding him, but it brought little comfort. The shadows, previously alive and shifting, simply retreated into corners, denser and more malevolent than before. The profound cold followed him, clinging to him like a shroud, and the phantom scent of decay permeated the air, even in the brightly lit room. He looked at his unmade bed, the very image that had flickered on the impossible feed. A chill ran down his spine. Had it been here? Had it been watching him while he slept? The thought was a grotesque violation, a defilement of his most intimate space. He threw open the curtains, revealing the dark cityscape outside, the distant lights of other apartments, a comforting reminder of external life. His gaze instinctively snapped across to apartment 4B. It remained dark, a silent rectangle in the vast expanse of the building. But now he saw it, a faint, almost invisible ripple in the glass of the 4B window, a distortion in the reflection of the city lights, as if something immense and unseen was pressing against it from the inside, a subtle tremor in the very fabric of reality. He began to piece together fragments of local folklore he'd once dismissed as urban legends, whispers of old residents vanishing from apartment buildings without a trace, hushed stories of phantom tenants who left behind no physical evidence, only a profound sense of dread. Could this building, seemingly modern and unremarkable, be one of those places? Was apartment 4B a nexus, a portal to something unseen, something that fed on the mundane lives of its residents? He remembered a brief conversation with Detective Davies, the retired officer who lived in the neighborhood, a man known for his eccentric theories on cold cases. Davies had once mentioned an unexplained pattern in disappearances from this very area, always dismissed as runaways or personal matters, but he had suspected something more sinister, something that left no physical trace. The building manager, Mr. Garcia, had always been dismissive, eager to sweep any anomalies under the rug, prioritizing the building's pristine image over the unsettling truths that lurked beneath its polished surface. His eagerness to downplay the issue now seemed less like indifference and more like complicity, or perhaps profound fear. Ethan felt a rising sense of urgency. He needed to find out what was in apartment 4B. He needed to find out what had made that click behind him. He needed to confront the unseen eye. He crept out of his apartment, the silence of the hallway amplifying every creak of the old building. He moved cautiously, his senses hyper-alert, listening for any sound, any whisper, any sign of the lurking presence. The corridor was deserted, dimly lit by motion sensor lights that flickered to life as he passed. The air here was colder than usual, the familiar scent of disinfectant replaced by the metallic tang he now associated with the entity. He reached the door of apartment 4B. It looked utterly ordinary, bland, indistinguishable from the others. No strange markings, no unsettling sounds emanating from within. Just a plain wooden door, a silent facade, concealing an unknown terror. He pressed his ear against the cold wood, straining to hear anything, but there was only a profound, echoing silence, a void that seemed to swallow all sound. It was the silence of something waiting, something patient, something that knew he was there. He knelt, examining the crack beneath the door, searching for any hint of light, any clue to what lay within. Nothing. Absolute darkness. Yet a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the wood, a low vibration that mirrored the hum he had felt in his own apartment, a sign that the building's unseen network was still active, still feeding. He imagined the impossible camera inside, its unblinking lens fixed on the emptiness, waiting. Then, as he pulled back, he noticed it, a tiny, almost invisible scratch on the polished surface of the doorframe, barely a millimeter long, but distinct. It was fresh, almost raw, as if something had recently scraped against it, and beneath it, just at the edge of his perception, a faint, almost imperceptible glint. He leaned closer, his eyes aching in the dim light, and saw it, a microscopic shard of what appeared to be dark, hardened resin, embedded in the wood, almost like a fragment of a very old, petrified insect. It was too small to identify definitively, but it carried with it the faint, metallic scent of blood and formaldehyde, a chilling signature of the presence within. The scratch, so innocuous, was a physical mark, evidence that the entity, or something connected to it, could manifest, could touch his world. Ethan's heart pounded, a frantic drum in the suffocating silence of the hallway. This wasn't just digital intrusion, it was physical, tangible. He slowly reached out, his finger hovering over the tiny shard, a morbid curiosity battling with an overwhelming sense of dread. He wanted to touch it, to confirm its reality, to prove he wasn't losing his mind. But a sudden profound chill swept through the hallway, so intense it made his teeth chatter. It was the absolute cold of the entity, now directly behind the door of apartment 4B, its presence a solid unmoving wall of malevolence. The air crackled with a latent energy, a tension so thick it felt like static electricity. He could feel its gaze, burning through the wood, through his very being, pinning him in place. A low, guttural growl, barely audible, resonated from inside apartment 4B, a sound that seemed to vibrate the very air, a monstrous purr of satisfaction. It was acknowledging his presence, recognizing his investigation, inviting him in. He instinctively pulled his hand back, a desperate tremor running through his arm. The shard, so small, now seemed to pulse with a faint internal glow, mirroring the malevolent presence behind the door. He was no longer just watching. He was being drawn in, a moth to a terrifying, unseen flame. And then from within the profound silence of apartment 4B, a low, distorted hum began to emanate, growing steadily louder, mimicking the very sound of a surveillance camera recording, but amplified, grotesque, as if the apartment itself had become a giant lens, now powered and focusing directly on him. The low, distorted hum emanating from within apartment 4B pulsed, a monstrous amplified mimicry of a surveillance camera recording, filling the silent hallway with its oppressive drone. It wasn't merely a sound, it was a palpable vibration, a deep thrum that resonated through the floor and up into Ethan's bones, shaking him to his core. It was the sound of something vast and unseen focusing, its lens turning, its gaze now fixed not just on the hallway, but directly on him, penetrating his very being. The air in the corridor grew impossibly cold, a profound, unnatural chill that seemed to drain the warmth from his body, leaving him shivering uncontrollably. The metallic scent of blood and formaldehyde intensified, stinging his nostrils, a nauseating aroma that spoke of lingering death and perverse preservation. Ethan, frozen in place before the unremarkable door of 4B, felt an overwhelming sense of violation, a terrifying intimacy forced upon him by this unseen observer. He was no longer the watcher. He was the watched. Every flicker of his fear a captured image, every beat of his frantic heart a recorded sound. He stumbled back, his foot catching on the worn carpet, desperate to escape the immediate vicinity of the humming door. But the sound seemed to cling to him, an insidious echo in his mind, growing louder with every backward step. He reached the safety of his own apartment door, fumbling with the lock, his hands trembling violently. He burst inside, slamming the door shut and leaning against it, gasping for breath, his chest heaving. The darkness of his living room still powered down, but pressed in on him. Yet now it felt like a fragile shield, inadequate against the omnipresent eye. He could still feel the entity's gaze, burning through the walls, through the very fabric of the building, a silent, relentless observation that promised no escape. He scrambled for his phone, its screen a blinding beacon in the gloom, desperate to find an answer, a way to fight back against this impossible intrusion. His initial attempts to rationalize, system glitches, cross-wired signals, had shattered, replaced by the chilling certainty that this was something ancient, something that defied all logic and technology. His phone screen flickered to life, and he immediately pulled up his surveillance app, even though his home system was powered down. To his horror, the apartment 4B living room feed was active. Not only active, but clearer than ever. The sickly yellow hue was gone, replaced by a crisp, cold monochrome. The impossible angle remained, looking down from his own ceiling. But now, a subtle shift in the perspective sent a fresh wave of dread through him. The camera was slowly rotating, panning across his living room, meticulously documenting every detail. It paused on the stack of books on his coffee table, then on the framed photograph of him and Chloe on their last vacation, then on the worn armchair where he spent most of his evenings. It was studying his life, absorbing his environment, mapping his existence. And then he saw it, a faint, almost transparent ripple in the air, barely visible, at the very edge of the camera's impossible lens, like a heat haze distorting the image. It was the same distortion he'd seen at the window of 4B, but now it was inside his apartment, a ghostly signature of the entity's presence. The metallic tang of blood filled his apartment, so strong it made his eyes water, burning his throat. It mingled with a new scent, something acrid and sickly sweet, like ozone and burning hair. His mind reeled, assaulted by the sensory overload. The entity was here, in his space, its silent presence amplifying every terrifying detail. He could feel its coldness radiating from the monitors, seeping into the air, creating a frigid pocket around him. The whispers began, not from a phone this time, but from the very walls, from the quiet hum of his refrigerator, from the faint distant sounds of the city, fragmented, overlapping voices, barely audible, like memories struggling to surface through heavy static. He watched, always watched, from the shadows. A child's voice whimpered, "The attic, don't go. He knows." An older, raspy voice warned. These weren't random. They were memories, echoes of victims, or perhaps insights into the entity's twisted nature. It was using his own apartment, his own senses, as a conduit, a horrifying broadcast of its past atrocities. He stumbled to the kitchen, desperate for a glass of water, anything to clear his head, to escape the suffocating sensory assault. but the refrigerator hummed with the same distorted drone he'd heard from 4B, and the faucet, when he turned it on, produced a thin metallic-smelling stream that tasted faintly of copper and rust. He leaned against the counter, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his gaze fixed on the apartment layout on his phone. He remembered Detective Davies's vague mentions of an unsolved string of disappearances in this building's history, dismissed as isolated incidents by Mr. Garcia. Davies had spoken of anomalies, of victims who simply ceased to exist, leaving no trace. Ethan now felt a sickening certainty. Apartment 4B wasn't just empty. It was a black hole, a place where people disappeared, and the entity was the one pulling them in, one by one. The building manager's dismissive attitude now seemed like deliberate obfuscation, a desperate attempt to cover up a horrifying truth that stretched back decades. The feed on his phone shifted again, the camera in his living room panning slowly, ominously, to his bedroom door. It paused there, as if waiting. Then the door slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to open, a narrow sliver of darkness, widening into a void. Emily's blood ran cold. Chloe was asleep inside. The entity was not just watching. It was moving, manifesting, entering their most vulnerable space. The whispers intensified, now focusing on a single, horrifying phrase. It finds what it seeks in the quiet. It was a direct warning, an implication that Chloe's defenseless sleep was a target. Dathan felt a surge of desperate, protective fury, battling against the paralyzing fear that had gripped him. He lunged towards the bedroom door, his only thought to reach Chloe, to pull her from the terrifying embrace of the unseen. But as his hand touched the doorknob, a jolt of ice-cold energy shot through him, not electrical, but something ancient and malevolent, locking his fingers to the metal. He was frozen, his strength useless, a helpless spectator as the darkness within the bedroom deepened. He could feel the cold radiating from the doorknob, seeping into his very being, draining his energy, his will. The whispers in his mind became a chorus of despair, the voices of the entity's past victims, their pleas for help, now mingled with taunts and chilling laughter. Too late. He's here. He sees all. He struggled, grunting with effort, trying to pull his hand free, but the doorknob seemed to fuse with his palm. Through the narrow opening of the bedroom door, he could now see a faint, translucent distortion in the air, barely visible in the darkness within, moving slowly towards Chloe's sleeping form. It was the silhouette he had glimpsed on the impossible feed, now fully manifesting, its form growing denser, absorbing the ambient light. It was tall, gaunt, its head tilted at an impossible angle, its movements fluid and unnatural. It was the Watcher, the Predator, finally revealing itself, drawn by his connection, compelled by his fear. A new whisper broke through the cacophony, a child's voice, clear and heartbreakingly familiar. "Daddy, it's dark. Where are you?" Ethan's mind reeled. It was his own daughter's voice, a memory, a phantom echo from a nightmare he had long suppressed. His daughter, Lily, who had vanished years ago. A case Detective Davies had officially closed as a runaway, but Ethan had never believed it. He had always known, deep down, that something more sinister had taken her. The entity was not just observing. It was reaching into his memories, weaponizing his deepest pain, revealing a grotesque connection to his past. The metallic tang in the air intensified, mingling with the sweet, sickening scent of lilies, her favorite flower. The entity in his bedroom paused, hovering over Chloe, then turned its head, slowly, towards him, as if acknowledging his sudden, horrifying realization. Its eyes, two pinpricks of burning red light, materialized from the darkness of its head, fixed directly on him, a silent, ancient gaze that promised an eternity of torment. It knew his truth, it knew his loss, and it was using it against him. He felt a profound sense of defilement, a grotesque invasion of his most sacred memories. The entity in the bedroom was not merely a watcher, it was a collector, a feeder on despair, on loss, on the terror of being unseen. The doorknob in his hand pulsed, hot then cold, as if battling an unseen force. He knew then that the missing tenants, the unexplained patterns Detective Davies had spoken of, were not runaways. They were victims, absorbed into the entity's horrifying collection, their final moments forever imprinted on its unseen feed. The apartment 4B was not just a portal. It was a conduit, a living trap, and his own surveillance system, his tools of control, had become the means of his undoing. He looked at Chloe, still sleeping soundly, unaware of the horror unfolding around her, and a desperate resolve ignited within him, a burning need to protect her from this monstrous truth. He would break free. He would fight back. He would not let it take her. He pulled harder on the doorknob, straining every muscle, the cold burning his hand. But his will was stronger, fueled by a primal fury. With a guttural roar, born of despair and furious determination, Ethan twisted the doorknob with all his might. The metal shrieked, tearing free from its hinges with a sickening crack, sending a jolt of pain through his hand. He stumbled into the bedroom, his gaze fixed on the entity, which was now fully manifested, its form a towering, skeletal figure of pure darkness, its eyes burning like embers. It stood over Chloe's bed, its elongated, shadowy fingers hovering just inches from her face. The smell of lilies, blood, and formaldehyde was overpowering. Ethan lunged, not knowing what he would do, only that he had to stop it. The entity turned, its head tilting at an impossible angle, and its form rippled, absorbing more of the dim light. It didn't retreat. It didn't fight. Instead, it raised a shadowy hand, not towards him, but towards the far corner of the bedroom ceiling, towards the precise spot where the phantom camera lens had been. And as it did, a new image, distorted and fleeting, flashed into Ethan's mind. A childhood photo of Lily, then a brief, impossible glimpse of his own living room from an angle he had never seen before, then the chilling face of Mr. Evans, the reclusive neighbor, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored Ethan's own. Then the entity vanished, not fading, but imploding, leaving behind only an unbearable cold and the faint, distinct sound of a distant camera shutter closing, not from his own apartment, but echoing from somewhere deep within the building's very foundations. The resounding, distant click, echoing from somewhere deep within the building's very foundations, reverberated through the now frigid bedroom, a final, chilling punctuation mark to the entity's abrupt implosion. Ethan, reeling from the sudden sensory vacuum left by its disappearance, stumbled forward, his hand still aching from where he'd torn the doorknob free. Chloe lay undisturbed on the bed, her breathing soft and even, completely oblivious to the horror that had just unfolded inches from her face. The scent of lilies, blood, and formaldehyde lingered in the air, a phantom perfume of dread clinging to his clothes, his skin. He stood over her, his chest heaving, a primal scream caught in his throat, unable to reconcile the monstrous truth he had just witnessed with the tranquil innocence of her sleep. The flashes of images, Lily's face, his living room from an impossible angle, Mr. Evans's terrified eyes, seared themselves into his mind, forming a mosaic of interconnected nightmares. He knew now it wasn't just his apartment. It was the entire building. It was a network far more insidious than any he had ever designed, and he had been irrevocably drawn into its grotesque feed. The profound cold persisted, radiating from the very walls, a constant pervasive chill that spoke of an ancient presence, a dormant horror that had merely retreated, not vanished. Ethan's gaze snapped to the ceiling corner where the phantom lens had been. Nothing, only plaster and paint, yet he felt its invisible eye, unblinking, still fixed on him. The silence in the bedroom, now devoid of the entity's oppressive hum, was even more terrifying, pregnant with an unseen menace that felt closer, more personal. He backed away from the bed, from Chloe, a desperate urge to put distance between her and the lingering residue of the horror. His mind raced, trying to process the impossible, to connect the fragmented images. Lily, his daughter, lost years ago. Detective Davies's dismissed theories, Mr. Evans's reclusive fear, the building manager's dismissive lies. It all converged into a single, horrifying truth. This building was a living archive of lost souls, and the entity was its grotesque curator, its cameras recording an endless feed of despair. He stumbled back into the living room, the darkness still absolute, save for the faint glow from the city outside. His surveillance monitors, still powered down, sat like dormant eyes, waiting. But he didn't need them. The images in his mind were clearer than any feed. He saw Lily's disappearance not as a random event, but as a deliberate act, her final moments played out on an unseen screen, consumed by the entity. He saw Mr. Evans, not as a harmless eccentric, but as a survivor, perhaps a previous victim of the impossible camera, trapped in his own apartment, forever watched, forever terrified. He understood now Mr. Garcia's indifference, his dismissal of complaints. The building manager was either complicit, a willing pawn in the entity's game, or too terrified to acknowledge the truth, maintaining a facade of normalcy while the abyss deepened beneath his feet. The metallic tang of blood and the sweet sickly scent of lilies returned, overwhelming his senses, a personalized assault, a reminder of his deepest loss. Driven by a desperate need for answers, for confirmation of his sanity, Ethan fumbled in the darkness for his emergency power bank. He connected it to a single monitor, its screen flickering to life with a weak blue glow, casting grotesque shadows on his face. He quickly navigated to the last active feed, the apartment 4B view. It was still there, a chilling monochrome image of his own living room from the impossible ceiling angle. But now, the image was different. It wasn't just static. It was filled with movement, faint, ghostly figures, translucent and shimmering, drifted across his screen. They were the victims, the lost tenants, their forms barely visible, their movements slow and mournful. They passed through his couch, his coffee table, their faces etched with profound despair, their hollow eyes fixed on something beyond the frame, something only the impossible camera could see. They were his neighbors, trapped in a grotesque loop, their final moments playing out in a spectral, unending broadcast from apartment 4B. The cold spot in his living room intensified, radiating from the very air, a profound chill that pierced his skin, as if these spectral inhabitants were passing through him, sharing their endless torment. He watched, transfixed by the horrifying tableau, a silent witness to a reality he could no longer deny. The faint, almost inaudible whispers returned, not from his mind, but emanating from the monitor itself, a collective murmur of despair. "We are here, always here. You see us now." It was a horrifying welcome, an invitation to join their ranks. He saw the spectral figure of Alice, the child from the central office, drift through his living room, her small, translucent hand reaching out, not for him, but towards an unseen corner. And then he saw Lily, his daughter, transparent and ephemeral, her small form floating near the armchair, her head tilted, her eyes hollow, fixed on the very spot where he now stood. Her image was clearer, sharper than the others, imbued with a personalized horror. A wave of profound grief, mixed with terror, washed over him, a crushing weight that threatened to buckle his knees. This was her fate, to be eternally trapped, a phantom in an impossible surveillance feed, forever watched, forever lost. The metallic taste of blood was now strong in his mouth, the scent of lilies overwhelming, suffocating him. He tore his gaze from the screen, his eyes burning, and looked at the armchair, then at the corner of the ceiling. There was nothing. No ghostly figure, no phantom lens, only the comforting, mundane reality of his apartment. But the profound cold, the metallic scent, and the crushing despair persisted, tangible and undeniable. He looked back at the monitor. Lily was still there, floating near the armchair, her eyes fixed on him. And then, slowly, a new figure materialized on the screen, just behind Lily's translucent form. It was Mr. Evans, his face a mask of profound terror, his eyes wide and hollow, mirroring Lily's. He too was translucent, a spectral inhabitant of the impossible feed, trapped alongside her. He wasn't a survivor. He was another victim, another addition to the entity's chilling collection. His presence on the feed confirmed Ethan's earlier suspicion. Mr. Evans had known too much, seen too much, and had been drawn into the same horrifying reality. The silence of his apartment was broken by a low, mournful hum that seemed to resonate from the monitor, a sound that filled his apartment, not from any internal mechanism, but from the impossible apartment 4B. Driven by a desperate need to sever the connection, to break this endless, horrifying feed, Ethan scrambled for the remaining cables. He would destroy them all. He would burn the entire system, smash the monitors, anything to stop the spectral broadcast. But as his hand reached for the power cable, a cold, slender tendril of pure darkness, impossibly thin and sinuous, snaked out from the screen itself, directly from the image of his living room, wrapping itself around his wrist. It was the entity, not just watching, but reaching out, asserting its dominion. The cold was unbearable, a burning frost that seeped into his skin, numbing his hand, paralyzing his arm. The whispers returned, a collective chorus from the screen, echoing in his mind, clearer now, triumphant. You are ours. You see us. You join us. The words were not a threat, but a statement of undeniable truth, a horrifying confirmation of his fate. He struggled, pulling against the shadowy tendril, but it tightened, its grip absolute, a bond forged in despair and violation. He felt himself being pulled, slowly, irresistibly, towards the glowing screen, towards the impossible feed of his own apartment. The spectral figures on the monitor, Lily and Mr. Evans among them, seemed to reach out, their translucent hands beckoning him, their faces contorted in a silent plea for companionship in their eternal torment. The air in his apartment was now thick with the scent of stagnant water, old concrete, and something else, something metallic and sharp, like the tang of his own blood. He could feel his will draining, his resistance fading, replaced by a profound, overwhelming sense of resignation. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic thudding of his own heart, a sound that seemed to slow, becoming weaker, more distant. He was being absorbed, piece by piece, into the endless feed, becoming another phantom in the entity's grotesque collection. His vision blurred, the edges of the room darkening, converging on the glowing screen, the ultimate window into his own inescapable nightmare. With a final desperate gasp, a futile attempt to cry out for Chloe, for a reality that was rapidly slipping away. Ethan's hand, still ensnared by the shadowy tendril, reached the screen. His fingers brushed against the cold, smooth glass, and an electric shock, not of power, but of pure, ancient malevolence, surged through him, consuming him. The screen flared, a blinding white light that filled his vision, absorbing him, silencing him. He felt a profound release, then a crushing despair, as if his very essence was being stretched, distorted, assimilated into the digital realm. The light faded, replaced by the familiar monochrome image of his own living room, now perfectly still. The subtle ripple of distortion, the oily residue, was gone from the corner of the phantom camera lens. It was pristine, perfect, meticulously clean. And then, a new, faint figure materialized on the screen, transparent and shimmering, standing by the armchair, its form vague, indistinct, but undeniably present. It was Emily, the urban explorer, forever trapped, eternally observed. And then, an even fainter, newer shadow began to form at the very edge of the frame, slowly, imperceptibly, coalescing from the digital static. The silent, unblinking camera feed, fixed on Ethan's own living room, remained, showing a perfect, chilling loop of his apartment, the newly added phantom figures moving in a slow, eternal dance of despair, forever watched by the unseen eye of apartment 4B. And with that, their story came to an end. But it leaves one last question for you. If your own home's cameras suddenly showed you living your life from an impossible unseen angle, would you ever feel truly alone again? Share your chilling thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next one.